In this video, what I want to talk about is reparations, which has been in the news and up on the stage with the Democrats recently. And there was an article about reparations on Slate that was posted up on Facebook, and I got involved in uh, the responses, and it was pretty interesting. Now, as I see it, there's reparations. There's two sides to reparations. There's the payment of reparations, and let's just set that aside for a minute. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is who pays. I mean, ultimately, if African Americans are going to receive reparations for slavery, people have to be taxed using the powers of government to force them to pay reparations. Now, one way around this would be simply to have people who believe in reparations to, put something on the tax form. I think African Americans should be paid reparations, and I would like to contribute an extra X number of dollars. I mean, you do that, there's no problem. People want to pay, and the government can go and sort it out and decide who's going to get it, which is a whole other problem, or who's eligible for reparations, a whole other problem. Some uh, African from Nigeria who just came here last year, is he going to get reparations? Um, should Native Americans get reparations? Should Native Americans have to pay reparations? Should Puerto Ricans have to pay reparations? Will Black Puerto Ricans get reparations? I mean, they were enslaved by Spain, not us. I mean, there's all these questions nobody's ever worked out. But just let me focus on the side of who's going to pay and some of the problems with that. I mean, if you think about, if there's one thing we have in this country, it's a Western legal tradition that goes all the way back. We don't punish children for the sins of their parents. I mean, I saw this show on the children of the leading Nazis. And like Hermann Goering's daughter, I don't know if she's still alive, but when they filmed it, she was living in like the wine country in California, peacefully, seemed like a little bit of a hippie, you know, living obscurely out there, not bothering anybody, not apologizing for her father's sins. But when we were going to hang Hermann Goering, he took poison and escaped that fate. But we didn't go after his wife. We didn't go after his daughter. And none of the other leading Nazis. I mean, they're descendants of the Bormans and the Himmlers. And I saw an interview with a guy who was the head of Auschwitz camp head. I mean, he had a son who's been to Auschwitz and apologizes and everything. But he wasn't punished. Many of them changed their names to escape, all the things that come with those names. I mean, who'd want to walk around, with the name Himmler, after the Second World War? So, I mean, that's a principle. And ultimately, what we're talking about doing here is punishing people for the sins of their parents. To complicate that matter, many of the people that we're going to punish didn't even have parents who were slave owners, or even in the United States. I think the number I read somewhere is like about 75% of the people in the United States today had no one here in their families during this before the end of the Civil War. I mean, my family didn't come over to the 1890s. Celine, my partner, she came over in the 1980s. So, I mean, should we be held responsible for things that happen? Now, I know the libtard response is, well, you benefit from, blah, 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 slavery and all that. But okay, if I do benefit in some way, I mean, I don't know, it's a sore point for me. My grandfather was Sicilian. The original family name was Palermo. They changed four of the five brothers changed the name to Palmer because there was a lot of anti-Sicilian feeling at the time. In Tampa, where I live today, in 1913, two Sicilians were lynched. The biggest mass lynching in U.S. history wasn't of African Americans. It was of Sicilians back in the 1890s in New Orleans, what the Italians called the Linciati. They lynched 11. I think the number was 11 that Sicilians were lynched. So I mean, I can imagine me sitting here having this conversation with my grandfather who died in the 1970s and saying he benefited from white privilege. I mean, that we didn't benefit from white privilege. That's why our name is Palmer. I mean, my grandfather as a kid was working in a mine somewhere, and then he started digging ditches because it was better air. And then eventually, him and some of his brothers formed a sewer contracting company, and then they split off into separate companies. He used to lie about the family name was Leva, and people thought he was Jewish. And he said he didn't usually correct them if they thought he was Jewish because he'd get more contracts from other Jewish organizations and companies who thought he was Jewish. So he just let them think he was Jewish. So I mean, I think if I was talking to my grandparents, I'd have a really hard time explaining to them how they benefited from white privilege. Um, some Italians and Germans, mostly Japanese, were rounded up, but there were Italians and Americans who were interned during World War II too. Uh, Many more Japanese were, and much more was done to them. They lost their property, their farms, their houses, their businesses, and all that stuff. But this is a good question. Should they have to pay reparations for slavery? Have they benefited from white privilege? Has my Korean partner, who's been here less than 40 years, have to pay reparations? Has she really benefited from white privilege? I mean, isn't she a woman of color? Should Native Americans have to pay reparations to African Americans? I mean, and the answer to any of this is no, then you've got a problem because then you have to figure out who's going to pay. I mean, you think I should pay reparations. Should I pay the same reparation costs as somebody whose ancestors actually owned slaves? Why? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if I have to pay reparations, okay, but we have a progressive tax system. We charge based on income. We charge people different tax rates. So if we're going to pay reparations, shouldn't we have progressive reparations? And it's not just how much you make, but how long have your ancestors been in the country? How long have they profited from white privilege? Which is nonsense anyway. But even if you believe that, how long have they profited? Should they have should what about a family of Irishmen who came here in the 1850s, and a bunch of them volunteered to fight for the Union Army, and a couple of them got killed? Should that family pay the same reparations as the family that fought for the Confederacy? Should there be no difference if today they have the same income? Should they pay the same reparations? Are they both equally? I mean, Nazis and Germans were held responsible for a variety of crimes after World War II, involved in the Holocaust and all kinds of other nasty stuff they did. But we had, hierarchies of criminality. You had the Himmlers, and well, Himmler died, but the Goerings and the Jodls and the Keitels and all the others who were the top tier decision-making Nazis. And then you had, lower people. We had this echelon of guilt. We didn't treat them all exactly the same. And if you were the closer you got to the upper echelon, the more likely you were to come out with a death sentence, as opposed to life or a long prison term, or just a couple of years. And this is for the Holocaust, which is pretty big crime. So I mean, to me, these are all the details that have to go into reparations if they ever actually plan to pull it off. And they obviously haven't thought them out. I mean, when I would raise some of these issues on this board on Slate, the only response I get was, "You don't know anything. You haven't evolved, and you're a racist." Nobody ever said, "Yeah, but," or "Well, we all benefit from white." Yeah, we all do. Maybe if you believe in white privilege, then you can say, "Well, we all benefit." But who benefits more? I mean, did Donald Trump benefit more from white privilege than Mike Palmer or Kang Ji-woo or Celine, my partner? How much has she benefited from white privilege? And try to tell her or any of her friends who are mostly Asian, South Asian, or East Asian, that they're benefiting from white privilege. And you get like big eyes and what? Run that by me again. And there are large numbers of these people in the country. I mean, you take all the Hispanics who probably don't think, why should they be paying reparations? All the Native Americans, all the East Asians, all the South Asians, and say, well, you're all going to pay reparations for crimes that were committed by white people, more than a century ago. I don't know if that's going to sell that well. So there's the devil's in the details. That's basically what I'm saying here. And there are a lot of details that and these people don't have answers to. And just how stupidly this is being handled. The other night, I guess it was the Tuesday night debate with what's her name, Williamson, and she said she believes in paying reparations. Matter of fact, she wants to pay a half trillion, $500 billion, a half a trillion dollars in reparations. And nobody said anything. It was applause. Yay! $500 billion in reparations. Yay! Nobody, none of none of the people in the panel apparently had a pencil and paper. I immediately, I ripped out a little pad of paper and a little pencil, and I started doing the math. If you take that number and you divide it by the number of African Americans in the country today, it comes out to $3,000. And if you pay it over a 10-year period, which is what they're usually saying, we'll do it over a 10 or 20-year period. Because nobody's going to come up with this big amount of money in 1 year. You're talking about $300 a year for 10 years. Now, I'm sure there are African Americans who would love to get $300 a year for 10 years, or even $3,000 in 1 year. But think about that. I mean, if I was an African American and I truly believed that I deserved reparations for the crimes committed against my family, over several centuries, is $300 a year going to do it? Am I going to say, oh, geez, fine, thank you, give me my $300 check? You're talking about peanuts here. This is chicken shit. And this is really what Williamson was saying. I'm going to give African Americans reparations of $300 a year for 10 years. And nobody said anything about it. They applauded because they're not, none of these people are doing the math. None of these people are getting into the details. And when you get into the details, it's nonsense. I mean, you would have to give people, 10 times that amount to even put it. And I don't even know that would make a dent. I mean, if you gave every African American 10 grand, you really think it would change their lives? I mean, if somebody gave me $10,000, I mean, I've lived a life. I'm 67. I've been working now since I was 16 years old. There have been times when I had money dumped on me from my father died. I signed a book contract. I mean, one time I got a book contract. They gave me the advance was $27,500. That's the biggest amount of just clear money that ever came in. Did it change my life? No, it helped. I paid down some bills. I paid my parents back some money I owed them. It didn't change my life. My trajectory, in life didn't go, whoa, up like that. And I don't think that's going to happen with anybody either. Even if you give them, 10 times what Williamson said, it's not going to change people's lives. I'm not talking about they're going to go out and waste it or blow it or buy a car. I mean, even if you gave people $25,000, you can't even go out and buy a nice car. It's not like they're going to go out and, buy a Cadillac for 25 grand. They can't even do that. It's not going to change people's lives. It'll help them for a year, maybe two, but that's about it. It's not going to, change it. And the other side of it that people don't talk about with reparations is, damn well in the minds of some people, non-African American people, and we can argue whether this is right or wrong, but this is going to happen. Once they pay reparations, it's like that's it. Don't expect anything else from me. I mean, that's the way it goes. We'll pay these, give you the money. Don't come back looking for anything else. And it's going to hurt. I think it would actually hurt the progress of civil rights and everything. There's going to be a lot of these people in the country who are going to say, that's it. We're even. Slate's even. Stop with the white privilege stuff. Stop with this. Stop. I don't want to hear it anymore. I had to pay all this money the last couple of years to pay you reparations. I'm done. Don't come back for more. Debt's paid. Isn't that what reparations means? The debt is paid. We don't owe you anything else. Don't ask for it. And I don't think that that's actually a good thing for this country. I think it would actually be a bad thing for this country. I think it would actually result in greater, wider racial divide rather than a more narrow racial divide paying reparations. Because even if we give people multiples of what Williams is talking about, in the end, African Americans are going to get this money, and 2 or 3 years later, we're going to say, right, it didn't really change anything. I said it didn't change anything in my life, getting $27,000. If we give them $25,000, it's not really going to change their lives. Well, when you're in a hole like I was, you dig your way partially out. Actually, in a couple of years, we were back in the hole again. It didn't really change things. I mean, if somebody had given me $1 million, and if you want to give $1 million to what percentage is it? 15, roughly 45 million African Americans, give them all $1 million. I don't know what the math is. That's an astronomical sum. And again, that doesn't even address who's paying. So there's all these problems with reparations, all these details. And the problem is they like to talk about it because they think they're going to get votes from blacks. But if they ever get to the point where they can start doing these studies and coming up with recommendations, it's going to be extremely divisive, because you're going to get a situation where either it's going to seemingly bankrupt the country, or you're going to have things like Williamson's proposal that they get a $500 billion, which is when they do the math, they're going to find out, she's given us $300 a year for 10 years, which is chicken shit. And I don't think that's going to please African Americans either. So this is a real minefield that is only not a minefield as long as they don't try to actually do it. If they talk about it, who wants to pay reparations? Raise your hand. That's fine. But once they get into the details of who's going to actually get reparations, who's going to have to pay reparations, how they're going to do it, is going to be a disaster. Political, racial disaster in this country. And it's just no way fair. I mean, there's no way it's fair that Salim, my partner, should have to pay the same reparations that the ancestor of somebody who actually, had 500 slaves should have to pay. To me, that doesn't make any sense. That's not fair. But to some of these people, if you even as this found out, if you raise these questions, you're an ignorant racist. Nobody had answers for me, other than, well, everybody benefits from white privilege. I had pointed out she's Korean. I didn't know Koreans were white, but I guess all Asians, East Asians now are white. It's the only thing I can conclude from all this. They're no longer considered, they're not underrepresented minorities, they're overrepresented minorities. They work too hard, they save money, they're thrifty, they're entrepreneurial. We can't have that. They undercut the narrative that this is a white-dominated racist country where only white people can do well. And then you have all these East Asians. I remember, I used to hear when I taught that GREs, graduate record exam, is prejudicial against minorities. They don't speak the language the same way. They come from a different culture, and so much is cultural and all. And I've been teaching graduate students since 1991. So that's like almost 30 years. And the student I had with the highest GRE scores we ever had in our program was from mainland China. And she had 800s, perfect score. English was her second language. She came from a different culture. All the things that I was told explain why this minority group or that minority group don't do as well as white Americans was totally undercut by this woman. I mean, we never had a white student with perfect GRE scores. in my experience. And there she was, and I was, I was a reader on her master's thesis. She aspects of American political culture that she didn't understand, but her language skills, her language was, there was hardly any correction. She wrote beautiful English, even though it was a second language. When I first met her, I assumed she was from like California or New York or something, and she had grown up in the United States. And then when I talked to her, I found one of the documents on her. She was from some city in China. It's hard for me to believe. How do you explain that? And that's part of the problem we have. But I mean, to say that these people should be paying, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that that's part of the problem with reparations. I mean, you have it's a political issue now, and they'll get some votes out of it, and they'll get some applause. But if, God forbid, we ever get to actually implementing it, it's going to be bad. Because, like I said, either African Americans will be very disappointed with the money they get, or people are going to be very pissed off that they're being expected to pay for the sins of the others. And that's why I said, if you really want to do reparations, my proposal would be put it on your federal tax form. There's a little box. Would you like to pay additional money for reparations for African Americans? And people can contribute whatever they want. And then the government will identify African Americans, and every year take whatever money they collect and send these people checks for reparations. And we can say, well, we'll do it for 10 years or 20 years or 25 or 50 years. I don't really care. And if you really believe that you owe reparations, by all means, pay it. I don't have a problem with that. But they'll never do that because they don't want to pay reparations. They want to make sure that I pay reparations too, and that Salib pays reparations, and that some Chinese immigrant who came here 2 years ago pays reparations. That's what they want, because that's the way progressives work. It's not really charity. It's using the government to force people to be charitable, but that's not charity. If somebody puts a gun to my head and says, I give me $10 for my church, that's not charity. If I give me $10, if they send me an email saying, would you please donate $10, to my church, and I send them, that's charity. And nobody's stopping anybody from paying African Americans reparations. There's no shortage of African Americans you see around town. You can write them a check. You think they should get 10 grand? You got the money, you write a check. Or have a lottery. You pick a name out of a hat, and that becomes your African American. You sponsor them, and every year you send them $1,000 for reparations. You want to do that? They can do that fine. They don't even need the federal government to help them if they want to do something like that. That's not what they want to do. They want to make sure that they punish people, whether they're for the sins of it would be okay maybe if we were all the descendants of slave owners, but we're not. And I see posts all the time from people who say, well, my family paid reparations. My great, 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 great whatever died fighting for the Union and Civil War to end slavery. These people are out there. A lot of people died in the Civil War. And a lot of people died, fighting against the Confederacy. I don't have any Confederates in my attic. My family they weren't even in the country, let alone fighting for the Confederacy. So I think, it's a shame that the media isn't more on the ball, because I don't see them talking about the flip side of a reparations coin. I haven't seen anybody talk about what Williamson said about, the $500 billion, which sounds like a huge amount until you break it down. It's really not. It's peanuts. And nobody's talking about any of these things because that's not what the media does anymore. They just bury their heads and applaud and cheer people on as they, come up with plans to tear the country apart and bankrupt